This Sunday marks 2 years since China announced its sweeping blueprint for a new world order as geopolitical tensions rise and conflicts evolve. In recent months, Beijing has been ramping up efforts to promote its global security initiative. It's a system that could rival Western frameworks and at the same time put China at the heart of international issues. Well, CNA's Tan Chiu-yi tells us more.
Chinese leader Xi Jinping proposed the Global Security Initiative in April 2022 at the annual Boao Forum in southern Hainan Island. He used an old Chinese saying that stability brings prosperity, while instability leads to poverty. Mr. Xi called on the world to adapt to profound changes and address security risks with what he called a win-win mindset. That means rejecting zero-sum games, dialogue over confrontation, and partnership over alliance. The Global Security Initiative, or GSI, China says, is an international public good. Officials released a concept paper last year, setting goals such as eliminating the root causes of crises and creating more stability in volatile times. Beijing says the world is facing unprecedented challenges as security hotspots flare up, alongside increasing protectionism. The GSI tries to counter these with what China calls a common, cooperative, and sustainable security, rejecting Cold War mentality, group politics, and bloc confrontation. The Global Security Initiative, according to China's foreign ministry, is serious about the legitimate concerns of all countries. It stresses the importance of dialogue and consultation, and it's looking at security on all fronts: terrorism, climate change, cybersecurity, biosecurity. And on the diplomatic front, Iran and Saudi Arabia resumed ties last year, with Beijing playing a mediating role. China has said it's a sign its global security initiative is working. Also, it's put up a 12-point peace plan for the Russia-Ukraine war.
To help us understand more, we are joined now by Lee Hak-yin, Professor, Institute for International Strategy, Tokyo International University, and CNA's Olivia Seong in Beijing. First up to you, Professor Lee. Help us understand, how does the Global Security Initiative, or GSI for short, compare with the Western frameworks or the current rules-based order led by US and its partners in Europe and the Indo-Pacific?
Well, it has been a long time. China attempts to find something substance enough that they can try to compare, if not to compete entirely with the United States regarding the Western order, such as human rights, democracies, and market economy. And from the Chinese perspective, all the time, if you refer to the system now they have, which is actually established by the United States and the Western countries in the past. So that's why they really want to find something as a kind of alternative to reshape the world order. So this is why the reason we have all the time the Chinese narrative. If you date back to sometime a few decades ago, actually, they talk about the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. And thereafter, you have Hu Jintao, he mentioned peaceful rise or peaceful development. And Xi Jinping actually, he tried to build up something based on those previous principles. So it's a kind of repackaging somehow to indirectly challenge the American order. So that would be the whole idea. I guess it's the evolutions behind the GSI here.
Now, Olivia, Prof. Lee has talked about this is sort of like an alternative to reshape world order. Are there reasons that China is pushing so hard for this GSI?
Well, Telly, I think we also have to recognize that the GSI didn't come up out of the blue. If we talk about back in 2014, 10 years ago, we heard President Xi talking about this Asian security vision in which he pushed this idea of a common, comprehensive, cooperative and sustainable security. That also at a time when the U.S. was rebalancing towards Asia under the Obama administration. So fast forward to April 2022, and we heard President Xi announce this new global security initiative, framed it as an initiative to promote security for all in the world. And if we were to break it down and look at the 6 commitments that he talked about: non-interference in internal affairs, rejecting the Cold War mentality, taking the legitimate security concerns of all countries seriously, it's not exactly new. And if you were to, if it sounds familiar, that's also because this is the common language that China has used to criticize the U.S. or the West and to to also accuse them of meddling in its internal affairs when it comes to Taiwan, for example, or to explain its position over the Ukraine war, where it has said that it has taken this neutral position, also echoing Russia's view that it was NATO's eastward expansion or the West that is fanning the flames of conflict in Ukraine. So it is really, lots of broad principles, but how effective is another question.
That's the question I'm going to ask Professor Lee. Just how effective is it going to be in terms of the impact and the reach? I mean, in the concept paper itself, they've mentioned about Ukraine crisis, Middle East, ASEAN cooperation, and all of that.
But one of the major limitations of the GSI actually would be something from the principles itself. For example, China all the time insists that there should be respect on sovereignty and territorial integrity of other countries. At the same time, they insist on the principles of non-interference. So that would be something, a kind of self-imposing norms, which limit the effectiveness when China attempts to facilitate negotiations or shape those, what we call regional conflicts in different parts of the world. So this is the first thing here. And the second thing here, actually, when you propose something internationally, you have to get the consensus, you have to build some sort of trust among different countries here. So the problem here will be a kind of socialization here. When someone proposes something new idea, new norms, new expectations here, you need to convince other people to trust your ideas. And thereafter, they have to internalize those new ideas and norms here. And what we see in the last year, if we're not going to too early time here, we see that we have different countries in the region. For example, we have the Philippines, we have South Korea. They're getting much more cautious regarding the rise of China. So that's why, from their perspective here, yes, you are proposing something new. This is the new norms, and everything is good because it's anti-power politics, no alliance politics in the region here. But the point here is those countries actually, they are now slowly or gradually actually bandwagoning with the United States because this is the survival issue here. So I think the problem here would be when you try to sell something to other people, but those issues would be something very controversial here, or even it's about survival. So that's why other countries may be very difficult to take those kinds of norms immediately. And the last point definitely would be refer to other conflicts that we are talking about very seriously in Ukraine, or maybe perhaps, the ongoing issues in South China Sea. The GSI itself is something very vague and broad. You win the consensus of the South countries, but you can do something really micro in some regional areas here.
Olivia, your take though, anything tangible from this initiative?
Well, I think as we mentioned earlier, the GSI talks a lot about broad principles and concepts, perhaps a little bit vague on the specific operational elements of how it intends to implement the GSI. But essentially, China is saying that this is what it can offer to the world versus the West, which it says in commentaries, we have said that the West, what it's talking about, its security vision, is engaging in small blocks politics, which China is opposed to. And China claims that more than 100 nations and organizations have voiced support for the GSI. Its implementation perhaps is a bit fluid, but we can perhaps glean a little bit from the examples of what it says has been successful implementation. One of them being that surprise peace deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, but also how it has issued position papers on Ukraine and Afghanistan. It also says it has communicated with all parties on the ongoing conflict in Gaza. But whether it's been successful, given the response that we've seen from the international community and the pressure that the US and other countries have put on China to use its influence more, especially in these ongoing conflicts, the success of the GSI, that is up for debate. And also, if we were to take a broader view, we have to recognize that the GSI is among a whole slew of initiatives that President Xi has introduced during his term. We're talking about the Belt and Road Initiative. There's also the Global Development Initiative, the Global Civilization Initiative, all part of efforts by China to position itself as a major player and also Another thing that it's part of is this broader approach of what President Xi talked about a decade ago of holistic national security. And that's not just internal security, but external security as well. Here's how the Foreign Ministry recently talked about it.
总体国家安全观根植于中国特色社会主义新时代，是中国共产党和中国人民捍卫国家主权、安全、发展利益100年奋斗实践经验和集体智慧的结晶。在总体国家安全观科学指引下，新时代国家安全工作取得了历史性成就，国家主权、安全、发展利益得到全面维护。 社会大局保持长期稳定，中国成为世界上最有安全感的国家之一。
Professor Lee, I do have a question for you. We know that with the GSI, it's quite unlikely that we will see the US or Western countries buying into it. So, in your opinion, do you think China is trying to sell the GSI perhaps to more specific regions, for example, the Global South or Southeast Asia?
Yes, I agree. The whole idea, if you refer back to those norms, expectations, let's say anti-power politics, or let's say we do not want to have the Cold War politics anymore, those would be something pointing to the existing Western imperialisms or neo-imperialisms. So this is like accusations China all the time refer to. You have the dominance of the United States in the United Nations, or you have some sort of alliance issues in Europe based on NATO. So that's why you have the conflict in Ukraine. So I guess that the target for China is not something the Western countries, definitely. And they try to clarify the intention in the past with the peaceful wise, idea or peaceful development. But the Westerns, no matter academia, policy circles, and the governments, they have no trust regarding what's that mean for the intentions behind China. So that's why the GSI, fundamentally, the target shouldn't be something the Western countries here. And they really look at the Global South. And the Global South, actually, they would be pretty much welcome the idea because of the norms of non-interference. And basically, it's no harm for those countries to join the GSI because it's very broad, it's very vague. And definitely, if you refer to the content of the GSI, they also cover different areas, including traditional and non-traditional security issues, including climate change, or how to, tackle terrorism. So this is a kind of a very broad package that can take all those countries into a kind of membership. And you build friendship, you have a legwork, but basically this is a legwork for friendship among the South countries. But for my understanding here, this is already enough. Because we're talking about in the UN, we have 193 member states, and most of them actually will be the South countries. If you can't vote in the UN, if you can't other kinds of actions in the coming future in the UN, actually China can earn support from those South countries here. But then the trade-off here would be when the United States see China gain more support, or let's say moral support in the UN, or maybe influence in the coming future. This is exactly why the United States is now arguing that China is challenging the rules-based order here, because somehow you prolong the authoritarian regimes, and you cannot actually proliferate or encourage democratizations in other countries. So that's why this is a kind of zero-sum game here when a country proposes something new, and then they get some more support in the South. At the same time, you have the North countries, they are seeing this as a kind of challenging to the existing order here. So I would be a little bit pessimistic regarding that kind of development here.
I'm afraid we have to cut you in there. We do have to go for a commercial break, but thanks so very much for your insights, Professor Lee and Olivia Seong in Beijing.